Hello and welcome to the Scottish Roadscast, a podcast all about Scotland's roads, bridges and motorways. I'm John and I'm joined by Stuart, of course. How are you, Stuart?
I am great, John. Good to see you.
Good to see you. Just the two of us today.
Just the two of us, just like old times, and our first new podcast of 2025.
Oh, yes, it is indeed. And it's a special one. A topic we've covered already quite a bit, but we're having a new and very special perspective on it this time. Do you want to tell us what it is, Stuart?
Yes, we are going to be discussing the Glasgow Inner Ring Road, which, to those who don't know, was a proposed urban motorway around the city centre of Glasgow, only of which the north and west flanks were constructed, and today they carry the M8 motorway through the city.
Okay.
There should have been another half of that ring that wasn't constructed and was formally abandoned in the 1980s, it's fair to say.
Was killed. Well, I just want to say there are loads of people who listen to lots of our podcasts and they're probably going, they're talking about the inner ring road in Glasgow again. But like I said, we have a bit of a fresh perspective because when did we first start the podcast, Stuart? Were they 2018?
It was April 2018.
Okay.
7 years ago.
7 years ago. And we spoke about the inner ring road almost straight away, didn't we?
We did, because we were Glasgow motorways only in those days.
That's right. It was the Glasgow Motorway podcast, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And now it's the Scottish Roadcast. We talk about a wide array of things, but that's actually a long time ago.
It is.
It literally, we have less hair and we have more wrinkles now,
Yep.
Well, speaking for myself, of course. But our perspective, what I'm trying to say is the national conversation around roads and some of this type of infrastructure, and even our perspectives have evolved somewhat.
Indeed. And the world has changed a lot as well.
The world has changed, and things have happened on the inner ring road that I think we need to address. So you mentioned about what's there at the moment and the sort of the south, these flanks that never came along. Give everyone a bit of a recap.
Yeah. Okay.
Let's see how it started again and why it is the way it is.
You know, this is my area of expertise.
So I can sit back and relax.
This is what kicked the whole thing off. I am going to start with the opening paragraph from our article on the website, which I think sums the whole thing up very well. The Glasgow Inner Ring Road was once heralded as the most important infrastructure project the city had ever seen, a visionary new road that would prepare Glasgow for a prosperous future. Yet, almost 80 years after it was first mooted, the ring road remains half finished, a victim of declining public support, indecision, and evolving approaches to urban planning. Okay? The Inner Ring Road as a concept was first outlined in 1945 in Glasgow's first planning report, also known as the Bruce Plan. He proposed a number of radical things for the city at that time, mostly relating to housing, education, industry, and the like, but transport was a key part of it. The report is often best remembered for his proposal to completely demolish and rebuild Glasgow City Centre. That's the thing everyone thinks about when you mention the Bruce Plan.
Yeah, they wanted to get rid of all the history of it and just have these new sort of like monolithic type buildings everywhere.
Exactly. However, his transportation proposals were actually radical. However, they were also feasible in the sense that although they were looking to, new ideas, urban motorways, for example, grade separated junctions, flyovers, all these sorts of things, they were actually rooted in sort of common sense engineering. It would have been quite easy to take it forward. And indeed they did. The first thing taken forward from the plan was the Clyde Tunnel, and we've mentioned that a few times over the years. The Ring Road was a bit more complicated. They just didn't have the budget in the 1950s and that post-war era. There was no money to take, a lot of infrastructure and work forward. So they prioritised the Clyde Tunnel because they knew it would provide some relief to the city centre bridges by building this new connection downstream. So that was prioritised. However, some work did continue in the Ring Road through the 50s. The plans were refined. And again, you can see lots of this on our website as well. It was only really about 1960 that things moved forward. In the late 50s, they had set up these comprehensive development areas. They were a sort of a key part of the Town and Country Planning Act of 1947. And basically what that enabled local authorities to do was designate entire parts of the city or the town for redevelopment. And that meant clearing away everything that was there and starting again. And when you do that, you have a nice convenient moment where you can slot new roads in.
Yeah.
And that's precisely how the inner ring road came about. So areas like Cowcaddens, Townhead, Anderston, these areas were all earmarked for complete redevelopment. All the old houses and facilities were going to be swept away, and they wanted to squeeze a new road in as part of these redeveloped communities. And that is ultimately what led to the M8.
Now, Stuart, there's comprehensive development. We actually had a whole podcast on this to address a lot of the people question why. Why would you build the M8?
Yeah.
You know,
It's a common misconception amongst people that it was the M8 that led to the wholesale demolition and clearance of areas at Townhead and Anderston, and to an extent Cowcaddens, Kinning Park, and places like that. However, that's not the case. Comprehensive development was signed off in the mid-1950s, well in advance of the motorway proposals. As we've said many times, the motorways were just designed to fit in within these cleared spaces that were being prepared. Think of Gorbals, for example, an area that was completely reimagined and had no major roads proposals within it. So what happened at Gorbals was going to happen at Townhead, Anderston, Cowcaddens, Kinning Park, all these places, regardless of whether the motorway came along or not. Okay.
Yeah.
So 1961, Scott Wilson, Kirkpatrick and Partners, 1960, correction, were appointed by Glasgow Corporation to do traffic studies, basically to determine what the inner ring road should look like in terms of whether it should be a motorway or just an all-purpose surface road or whatever, and how wide should it be, where should it go, where should the junctions be, all these sorts of things that you need to consider when you're planning new roads. And they eventually reported in 1963 with a proposal for an urban motorway ring around the city centre, varying from 2 lanes wide at Charing Cross up to 5 lanes wide on the east flank approaches to the M74 or Hamilton motorway, as it was known at that time. Because the priority comprehensive development areas were located in Townhead, Cowcaddens and Anderston, the north and west flanks went ahead first. And that's why we have the M8 through the city.
So the M8 as it is the north and west flanks.
Correct.
So it's half a circle.
Half a circle, yes.
Of the ring road.
The south and east flanks were intended to follow by 1980. However, there were a number of reasons that meant they just weren't constructed. So there was public opposition almost from the start to the anticipated impact the road would have on the historic Glasgow Cross area, on the High Street, and also on Glasgow Green. On the back of that, there were also significant political changes in the sense that Glasgow Corporation, who promoted the ring road, was abolished in 1975 and replaced by Strathclyde Regional Council. Economically, budgets for road building were vastly reduced in the 70s due to the economic situation. The grant assistance that had been available to local authorities to build new roads from the post-war period up to 1975 was abolished. What that meant was the incoming Strathclyde Regional Council would basically have to have funded the entire project themselves, which at that point was looking at like 30 to 40 million pounds worth, which is over 200 to 300 million today.
Yeah, and that's just unthinkable for a local authority.
Exactly. And eventually, they reworked the proposals a number of times. They pulled it east away from the cross and made a few tweaks and changes, and eventually actually was downgraded from a motorway to a sort of urban dual carriageway, limited access, 2 lanes each direction. And then eventually in 1980, they gave up and they said, okay, we're only going to build the section between Townhead and London Road. And that remained the policy for a number of years, but that never happened either.
I think one of the things is you're saying that when people, because you say obviously the north and the west flanks came first. I think one of the things is particularly at Charing Cross, when people seen what that was like, that only fueled the opposition. That people start to get towards the late 1970s and 80s, which was
and that's a valid point. We should point out that of all the sections of the M8 built in the city centre, and there were 1, 2, 3, 4 contracts in total,
including Kingston Bridge,
only the section through Charing Cross, so from Great Western Road to St Vincent Street, that was the only section that wasn't built in a comprehensive development area. That's to say the road was promoted in a traditional way where roads orders were promoted, compulsory purchase orders were taken forward, property was acquired, demolished, and the road built there. So that was why that's a slightly narrower corridor of clearance through there. So the historic buildings are still there on either side, thinking of St George's Mansions, Charing Cross Mansions, some of the other ones. So that was sort of built in the traditional way for roads and
compulsory
motorways.
purchase and other things like that. Yeah.
And that was controversial as well. But, and we've spoken about this as well in the past, that from an engineering perspective, the corridor through Charing Cross really was the only viable option because of the topography. So you've got Garnet Hill to the east that sits quite high. You've got Park Circus to the west. And if you had pulled the road east or west of there, it really wouldn't have worked at all from a traffic point of view.
And also, you're solving one problem and creating another.
Exactly.
And do you know, in fairness, like, I know you're going to talk about Halford's consulting architects and things like that, but the design of that particular area was kept on those two levels, so it wasn't only on two levels, so it wasn't big, high stacked junctions of 3 or 4 levels, and it was a depressed motorway through there as well, which I know you're going to cover.
That's right. Yeah. So I mean, it's like.
It's done the best they could with the option or the route that they decided. So it could have been worse. I know that's not a great argument, but it could have been worse.
Look, with 60 years of hindsight, it's easy to sit here and pontificate about what they should have done and how it should have been done.
Totally.
I guess really, when you think about it, so Halford's, you mentioned, Sir William Halford and partners, he and his architectural firm were appointed by the corporation to sign off on all proposals for motorways within the city. That's to say that they made comment on the proposals to make sure that from an aesthetic point of view, they fitted with the existing landscape as well as they could. And like you say, at Charing Cross, that resulted in the motorway being placed in a cutting, in a channel in front of the Mitchell Library, so the motorway was placed below the existing ground level to minimise the impact of it visually on
and they put a cut and cover tunnel in.
That's right. Another thing that they did there at Charing Cross. And that was all done at considerable expense at the time to try and improve on the fact that this motorway was cutting through this fairly historic part of Glasgow. So, like we say, at the time, they were doing things that were new. They thought they were doing the best they could. As I say, looking back after 60 years, would we build an urban motorway through that area in that way? Absolutely not.
Yeah, absolutely, I think we can say that definitively. But did we have the same problems now that we do then? I mean, the traffic situation was dire. We see the justifications of this, and sometimes extreme problems, extreme solutions.
From a traffic point of view, so ignoring the social impact for a second, and focusing purely on the traffic and the movement of goods and people and blah, 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 there was a clear justification for a new east to west motorway from Glasgow to Edinburgh. The A8, as it was at that time, couldn't cope with traffic. Journey times in Glasgow city centre from Townhead to Charing Cross typically took an hour to an hour and a half. Journey speeds were like 5-6 miles an hour. It was chronic. Buchanan Street, Sauchiehall Street, Giles Street, Bath Street.
Choked with traffic.
Exactly.
Yeah. This was the problem. The motor car needed to go somewhere else, and it wasn't the city centre, Yeah.
And all the surveys they did, even in the 50s and then into the 60s, something like 75 to 80% of all traffic in Glasgow city centre at that time, so in 1960, actually was travelling through, going elsewhere. They had no business in the city centre itself. These were people going from Stirling to Ayrshire, Greenock to Edinburgh, Lanarkshire to Dunbartonshire, cross-conurbation journeys that all had to go through or near Glasgow city centre.
Yeah.
Just because typically all the old historic routes converged.
They did, and there was Glasgow was far more industrialised in its centre at that time as well. Now, okay, right, the picture I think everyone's got in their heads is that, okay, it's a necessary evil.
From a traffic perspective, yes.
From a traffic perspective, and it took lots, and it allowed things to be pedestrianised. So, with Sauchiehall Street or Giles Street, so suddenly we've solved this problem, right?
Yeah.
But why now? If we look at the M8, what reputation it has now from a driver's point of view, or for example, it's always congested, it's always full. Do you think that's because they didn't build the whole thing?
Yes, so it's important to mention. So the only 50% of the plan that was proposed was ultimately constructed. And again, on the website, when you read the pages in Inner Ring Road, you'll see that as that developed, Glasgow Corporation very quickly realised that Scott Wilson should probably make proposals for the rest of the city's road system as well, because the Inner Ring Road would need to connect to other new motorways and expressways that were planned. So that led to the highway plan for Glasgow that was published in 1965. Okay, only 50% of that was taken forward for the same reasons, I might add, that I mentioned earlier: economics, politics, public opinion, right? So a number of things didn't go forward for that reason. The inner ring road and the parts that were built were designed to operate within an entire system of new roads.
So
If
this would
you
be a
only
motorway
build,
going all the way
that's
across
right.
Oldham
If
and
you
South.
only build half of something that has been designed to act as one, there's
Yeah.
always going to be problems. And they always knew. And they had a phased approach to building the roads that got built. And, you know, they always had in the back of their mind that the section that we're currently building could end up being the last. And that's why actually the M8 as it exists ties in nicely with junctions and surface roads and whatnot, because as they extended it and built more and more bits, it was always intended that if, should they not build more, it will function adequately. However, they knew that by 1980, did they not continue into phase target 3, the highway plan, that congestion would start to appear on the M8 when it was completed all the way to Baillieston. And what happened? That was completed in April of 1980, and by August 1980, we already had quite significant congestion on the inner ring road on the north flank, because where it narrowed down at Charing Cross to go 2 lanes from 4 lanes, that in the highway plan or in the inner ring road proposals was supposed to be the quieter corner of the ring road.
So,
Everything was intended to use the east and south flanks,
which
of
would
the
have
ring
gone
road.
down that high street direction
That's
towards
right.
Glasgow Green, crossed over and gone via the Gorbal. So that would have been, if that would have been built, we would have seen that as the main line sign.
That's right. So if you had been coming from Greenock and you were going to Edinburgh, you would have continued along the Renfrew motorway, past Cardonald, past Plantation. You wouldn't have crossed the Kingston Bridge. You would have taken the south flank of the ring road, then turned left, went up the east flank, and then rejoined the M8 at Townhead and continued on your journey east. Likewise, if you were heading south to Lanarkshire, we would kind of have done like we do today in the M74, but part of that would have been on the south flank of the ring road and then onto the Hamilton motorway, which was one of the spokes coming off of that. Charing Cross was envisaged as only handling sort of local journeys. You know, so the people that were heading to the northwest of the city, heading maybe for the Maryhill motorway, that was also one of the
Maryhill motorway going to the expressway, for example.
That's right, exactly. You know, so Charing Cross was never supposed to be as busy as it is, which is why it was only built with the 2 through lanes. You know, so that's the primary reason for that. So again, it all comes back to the fact that it's just a small piece of what was intended to be a much larger puzzle. And for those who've been listening to us for a very long time, they'll remember a few years ago we had a chap on who, as part of his sort of final year project at university, he actually did a full traffic model on the system as proposed in 1965 and demonstrated that had it all been built, that Glasgow would still have been congestion free today.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
You know? So you know, Glasgow in some ways is the proof that perhaps it breaks the myth of you can't build yourself out of congestion. But yeah, you just have to put roads pretty much everywhere. A lot of them.
Well, from the traffic perspective, that makes sense.
Makes
yes,
sense.
But obviously, there's a social impact from the building of urban roads in particular that
There
can
is
affect their local areas.
There's a severance issue.
Yeah.
You know, and there's you know, with all the roads, actually, I don't think we talk about this very much, but more roads and more maintenance. You know,
yeah, there's a cost. There's
a cost that you're stuck with with doing all these things.
Yeah.
And obviously the whole conscious thing about cars as well and emissions and things like that. So, I think we're not got a huge amount of time, but I think it's worth mentioning that there was a hero that came along for the M8. Inner ring roads plans, the unbuilt sections that were never built. Ultimately, the mitigation arrived in the form of the M74 completion, which provided this alternative route across the city. Now, that's a separate road, and I know, but I think it's worth mentioning that's, is it right in saying, Stuart, sort of put in the function of the south flank?
Kinda. I always considered the M74 completion to be 50% south flank and 50% south link motorway. So on that highway plan, again, the highway plan proposals are on the website. If you go to the articles page and then scroll down to the bottom, you will get the highway plan maps. Click on them, you'll see the detail. Yeah. I've always considered, as I say, the M74 to be a bit of a hybrid south flank, south link motorway, in the sense it does a bit of both. So the south flank of the ring road was obviously going to be very important, but so was the South Link motorway in terms of access to the south side, Rutherglen, Pomodie, these sorts of areas. So the M74 does a bit of both, I would say.
That's a fair assessment,
Yeah.
thinking about where those roads were going to go. And you keep mentioning the website. By the way, when you're listening to this, get a chance to go and have a look at our interactive maps, and you can see where all these roads were going to go.
Yeah. One thing that I would say, so I've been studying this for years, well over a decade now, the Inner Ring Road and the plans for it. And I have come now to the realization, right, and in the last few years, some of my recent research, the east flank of the Inner Ring Road was never going to be built.
Ever. Even when they planned it in the very early 60s.
Even when they planned it, there was no realistic chance of that road being built as proposed, because it was, and no disrespect to the designers, this is not the fault of the designers, because we know when we spoke to John Cullen about this corridor was forced upon them by the planning department of Glasgow Corporation, right? But it was as if their own planning department was ignorant to the historic nature of the areas that they were proposing to run this motorway through.
So you're talking like Salt Market.
Glasgow Cross,
yeah.
The toll booth steeple. At one point the ring road was only going to be something like 50 metres, to the east of that. The Mercat Cross building.
Yeah, and was it not elevated in sections?
It was elevated as well. It would have been like your Woodside Viaducts, your Kingston Bridge approaches. It would have been sitting high up above the surface streets. And when you think about those areas, which were well regarded
sort
even
of
then,
sweeping over there.
That's right.
Yeah.
When you think of it like that, right? I don't think there was ever any realistic chance of that road being built. And again, even where it passed the cathedral and the Royal Infirmary, they did eventually come up with some mitigation where they were going to put it in cut and cover tunnel.
That's right.
Which that probably would have worked there quite well.
There's so many revisions to this in the end that it almost speaks well to your theory of it was never going to work.
Yeah.
So that's why they went back to the drawing board so many times, and then eventually it didn't get built.
What should have been proposed for the city centre, I think, would have been an at-grade boulevard type road in the east of the city that would have tackled some of the problems they had at High Street with traffic, even in the south flank area as well. The East Link motorway that was proposed would have been the far better option for taking the long distance traffic. Huge fan of the East Link.
They missed a trick, right? Prior to the Commonwealth Games, there's a road known as the Clyde Gateway. It was known as the East End Regeneration Route. Now, when you said, an at-grade sort of boulevard, and I thought, well, we kind of got the little bit of this by Parkhead and stuff, but they could have built something like this, and it would have been amazing for the East End. And you could have had an expressway type road even.
Well, that East End Regeneration Route is built in the corridor that was set aside for the East Link motorway.
For the East Link,
yeah. And if you think about it, if you'd be coming south in the M80 and that motorway had continued through there, and then had looped round and met the M74, say in the Pomodie area where it is now, that would have dealt with a lot of the issues, and then you would never have needed an east flank of the ring road. All right, you're still going to need traffic improvements or road improvements in that part of the city, because movements from north to south or whatever have always been problematic there. But I just think that there were other options that weren't to urban motorway standard that may have been more appropriate and might actually have had a chance of being built.
Build what's buildable. Yes, we probably all. Do it goes back to we have this problem with modern construction projects where things are almost over-specced. And it's like, yes, we all agree it'd be lovely to have a high-speed rail line that goes 400 miles an hour, but let's be realistic here. We're not going to get that. So what you were saying is there should have been some sort of compromise. It's better to have something rather than nothing, because at-grade boulevards are actually not that great for traffic flow, but they're better than residential streets.
Yeah, the planners, I think the planners, so originally they thought that much of the Glasgow Cross area was going to be cleared for comprehensive development as well. But that was never going to happen. There was outcry about that proposal almost from the get-go, and that was the mid to late 50s, right? So the tide turned not just against urban motorways and urban road construction, but actually against the theory of clearing away everything and starting again. The sort of concept of refurbishing what we have, be it the tenements or other, old buildings, started, conservation started to become more important.
post-warism, though,
Yeah,
wasn't it? I mean, we didn't live in that era, but we certainly know people who did,
yeah.
and so on. And it was very much this. Britain's been this terrible place where we been at war, and throughout the 50s we've had all this, and nothing really changed, and we just wanted to clear away the old.
Yeah.
Britain was changing. It was de-imperializing as well. We wanted to become different, and
Mhm.
so there was nothing wrong with sweeping things away until
No,
you say people went, hold on a minute, actually these are some really nice buildings and nice areas, and
this is
we,
all
sh-
a bit much.
we
Exactly.
shouldn't get rid of all this
Mhm.
in the name of 20th century progress in every case.
Mhm. Yeah,
um
I mean, it's easy. Like much of the ring road that was built, so the M8 that was built actually was through like brownfield sites. So when you think of most of the North Flank,
mhm.
went through like the old canal, some of the industrial areas to the north of Townhead, the old chemical works and places like that. All right, there was some property demolition at the Cowcaddens area as well, and obviously Anderston. You know,
I'm going to use that word, which is problematic, but I've never thought of associating that word with the North Flank particularly.
hmm
Sure, Charing Cross, and you're totally right with what you're saying about stuff down in Glasgow Cross and
hmm
stuff like that.
hmm
But I'm just going to put an alternative history to you. Imagine they did build that east and south flank and they never put it through Charing Cross. Then all the people saying, "Oh no, poor Charing Cross, that could have been saved," by
I
these
know.
things. So it's almost like you could have saved that the Grand Hotel, but at the expense of the environment at Glasgow Cross or Glasgow Green.
By the way, something I discovered recently, the research goes on and we're still finding new facts and figures. The east flank of the ring road was actually approved for construction as far south as Duke Street because it was approved as part of the Townhead interchange.
Yeah.
So actually, they could have built the section all the way down to Duke Street had they wanted. That was fully
That
approved.
Do you know what, Stuart? So see, when you come off at Townhead now, it is, as we have described before, a bit of a traffic sewer.
hmm
It does kind of dump you, and it's all a bit confusing. It's not an easy place to navigate on foot or even by car
Yep.
because it was meant to be something else. But
hmm
if it did cleanly tie in to
Yep.
Duke Street, it
hmm
probably would have been better.
Made them a bit
You know.
easier. So yeah, I only found out recently that the section right down to Duke Street was part of the approved plans. The Secretary of State for Scotland approved all that. So had they put a contract together, they could have built it.
Mm,
The time for opposition to that one had long since passed, which would have been interesting. But it
yeah.
really was that it was the impact in Glasgow Green of the Hamilton motorway and the Glasgow
Well,
Cross.
that's
And the
right, because
East
the
Flank.
M70, you'd say Hamilton Motorway, which would have
Mhm.
been basically the
Yeah.
M74, would have tied in
Mhm.
at Glasgow
You
Green.
would have had this mega four-way semi-directional T interchange right
You
in the middle
you
of
would have
Glasgow
done.
Green.
So semi-directional interchange, which is three leveled, by
Yeah,
the way.
yeah.
It's really cool from an engineering point of view.
Mhm.
Probably not very cool for the people around there,
Not not appropriate for that area at all.
but the bridge would have been lower. So this other bridge going over the Clyde,
Mhm.
it wouldn't have been as high as the Kingston Bridge because was it not by the Clyde Weir
It was so shipping wasn't it? Was
shipping? So you would have got this lower profile
yeah,
bridge, and some of the artist impressions of this bridge are fantastic.
yeah,
With the big tower on it and everything. Oh,
yep.
it's so cool.
Mhm.
Um, the ring road today, Stuart. We've spoken about this topic many times, and we've grown older and spent a lot of either our working lives or personal lives in and about this road.
Mhm.
There have been some changes, I believe, that have come in the times we've been there. We've got the new bridge at Sight Hill.
Yep. Which I quite like.
Yeah, I certainly think it's different, which
It's
is
different.
nice, and I like different bridges. Given we live in the DMRB world now, and it's just pick a bridge from a list, and
Mhm.
they're all the same everywhere.
Yep.
There's been big discussions about putting that cap over Townhead, not Charing Cross.
Mhm. Yep.
So capping the motorway further and kind of improving the environment around there,
Mhm.
which we've discussed a lot, and there are lots of difficulties with that, and so on. But it's the vision of
Yeah.
it.
Can I just come in at this point to say that I am very impressed with the work that has been done at Charing Cross recently? The new cycleway and active travel corridor they've put in there, by the way, is what should have been there from day one.
Yeah,
Nice
they
wide
have improved that
footways,
up.
good walking facilities through there, and with absolutely no reduction in capacity for traffic through that junction. I went for a walk there the other week and I was mightily impressed. with what's been done. And there's been some other maintenance done as well, new railings and things put up.
Do you know what is sometimes, Stuart? It's actually like smaller things that make big differences like that, And the optics of that scheme were not bad. It wasn't, oh, you're taking away road space or
Yeah.
you're doing something. You know what? Should we give Glasgow City Council some
Absolutely.
credit?
Absolutely.
Well
They
done,
deserve some
Glasgow.
credit for
They
that one.
deserve some credit. And like I said, it came at no premium to anything. One of the other massive conversations that's gone on is well, some massive conversations, but some from fringe groups saying, well, why don't we just get rid of the whole M8? Why don't we just scrap the whole thing? Loads of towns are doing this. Well, the other conversation these people don't tell you is that's because they're building a massive bypass.
Exactly. I know it's a convenient argument, that one, that so and so removed their motorway. But it was only used by 30,000 vehicles a day and it was 2-lane and it was
exactly. Yeah. It's really funny because there's a colleague of mine who'd done his dissertation on could you remove the M8, and he actually was of a slightly biased opinion that actually we could do away with it. He'd done all his research, he'd done the traffic modelling, he looked at it, and it found out it would be disastrous on the city centre streets. HGVs and all these things coming down the streets, and one would be traffic chaos, but also maintenance nightmare.
Well, I think that's the problem. Ultimately, some people seem to be forgetting that the M74 was built to provide an alternative across the city because the one that we had couldn't cope. If you remove the M8 part through the city centre, we go back to the scenario where there is only one route for through traffic.
You've turned the 74 into the M8.
That's right. And although it's 3 lanes, it still has bottlenecks at either end. At the Maryville interchange or at Kingston interchange. So there would still be chronic congestion on it. It's not designed. It's already creaking at the seams because of the works that are going on in the M8. It's maxed out at its 120,000 vehicles a day or whatever it can handle for a 3-lane motorway. Parts of the M8 are still carrying 150 to 170,000 vehicles a day. They're using the M8.
And it's got local journeys and connectivity that come with this as well. It's fair enough. The strategic traffic going from Ayrshire and other places to Edinburgh is going via the 74.
And it's a strategic route, and I sympathise with the people in the city centre where the M8's going through, but ultimately it has become one of the main routes.
It's a hugely economic important thing. I think we all agree on that. We can't not talk about some of the works that have been going on the M8. Obviously, the sections in the north flank feature elevated viaducts known as Woodside. Lots of maintenance works coming. A very necessary maintenance.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, we've got an inner ring road that was built between 1965 and 1972, so that puts it just coming up in about 60 years. Roads and bridges in Britain are always designed with a design life of 120 years to last. When you start getting to midlife, and when you've been pummeling these things with thousands of vehicles every day for 60 years, they're going to need maintenance works.
Remember what you said, Stuart. That was the quieter side that was built. And they had to widen that in the 90s to accommodate it. And now it's getting to a point where it needs major work.
Yeah, and that's what's happened at Woodside and at other parts where there's been a lot of work going on. Just maintenance, tender, loving care, just ensuring these routes continue to operate. And then it is a pain in the backside when you get caught up in closures and things overnight. But ultimately, any works like this are essential if the things to continue operating.
And would it be safe to say that the works at Woodside, you obviously sure about bridges and things like that, is that are they complicated or is it just very big?
Oh, it's hugely complicated. I mean, we're talking these multi-span elevated viaducts, that are still working and carrying tens of thousands of vehicles every day. When you're trying to do things to them, to repair them and refurbish them at the same time, while keeping it operational, is a huge undertaking. It's an engineering nightmare. I really feel for the folk that are involved in it, I must say, because it's a bit of a thankless task. You're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't, in that sort of regard.
Everyone's having a hard time, I think, with everyone living around it and driving on it and working on it. So
and see if you look at the social media pages of any of our operating companies in Scotland, whether it's AMA or the councils or anything, and they're saying we're closing such and such a road for a couple of weeks to do work, and you get 200 comments of people moaning. You can bet your bottom dollar that the same 200 people would be moaning about the potholes in that road 6 months later.
Exactly. Or the flooding or the road markings or whatever and things like that. Yeah, but that's the game we're in. So people are like, we'd be lost without the experts, Stuart, as I always say.
The keyboard warriors, you mean?
Keyboard warriors and these things. So hugely, hugely complicated works, but it is for the betterment of the motorway in the long run. So no, that's
So we've obviously given a very high level overview of the sort of ring road. So on the website, scottish-roadsarchive.org/inner ring road.
yeah.
That will bring you to the story of Glasgow's Inner Ring Road. That's part 1. There are then further parts to read on Townhead, Woodside, Charing Cross, and Kingston Bridge. Okay, so it's a multi-part article. The South and East Flanks page is currently in preparation. I think I've been saying that for the best part of the last 15 years, actually. However, we are close to getting that page.
When I met you, right? When I met you, Stuart, it was 2013 or something, and you were like, "I'm hoping to get them out in the next couple of weeks."
It's almost ready.
These
And
things
at that
take
point,
time.
yeah, exactly. And at that point, we will have a full sort of a range of
The ring
articles.
road will finally be completed.
Yes, but what is up there already provides a real
Yeah,
in-depth look at the history behind the
it does. I
Hipparion.
mean, those southeast pages are going to be good, but they're a bonus at this stage because
Yeah,
you can already find out everything about that already.
indeed. And also, we have articles on the highway plan for Glasgow. We have the recommended road network map. We also have a page on comprehensive development as well, which gives you a bit more information on what was proposed for the city and why they did what they did. So worth having a look at them. So if you were to scottish-roadsarchive.org/articles, look there, you will get all of these pages available that you can have a good read through,
Well, fantastic.
and it'll tell you all about them.
You sound like you're putting on your "we're finishing the podcast" voice here. So
I just
I
thought that was an important point to make at this stage. Yes.
absolutely. But I have a question. We don't have any user questions, but I have a question from me
Mhm.
to you, Stuart. An honest one, and it is: has your perspective of the M8 changed since we started talking about this? Like maybe in the last 10 years, has it changed somewhat with everything that's been said and going on? And if it has, why?
Yes, I suppose it has, which I guess is only natural. Um, like I say, I have a new perspective on the east flank. I
Mhm.
do think the section between Duke Street and Glasgow Green was impossible to build. I don't think it would ever have happened. South flank probably could have. The M8, am I less convinced of the need for the M8? No.
Okay.
I think it still has a very clear purpose. Is it ideal? No.
Yeah.
Are we much more sensitive to the impact of these things on communities and people? Yes.
Yeah.
So I would say so. I would say my
You'd say
perspective has changed a
perspective has
bit.
changed. Yeah.
I think, with the benefit of hindsight, other more appropriate options could have been considered.
Yeah. That's all we're going to get from you there, I think. No, it's fair enough. The conversation has changed. And you know, one thing I'll just say, the M8, like many things of the '60s, was perhaps a product of its time, but it does serve us very, very well today, and has a lot of economic potential and journey options and everything for us. So there is good and there is bad, but we, you know what, Stuart, we'd jolly miss it if it wasn't there.
Indeed.
So
And without a sort of fully, integrated transportation system in the conurbation, with people so dependent on the car, to get across to work or whatever, I don't see that changing anytime soon. Um, but that's another debate.
it is. It is. But you know, it's kind of sad. It's really hard to get anything built and done quickly and or at all because it's still very expensive
I know.
at the moment. We seem to be slow when it comes to doing things, and it's getting worse. So
Indeed.
perhaps again another podcast about planning and procurement of all these sorts of things, which is always very difficult and interesting in its own way. But
Hmm.
yeah, well, I think that's all we've got time for. We'll call that a wrap. But it's good to revisit this old favourite topic again.
Hmm. I
So
think so. It was a
no,
good
that's
a
fine.
good moment to touch on it again. As you
Should
say,
we
there's a lot going on.
Should we thank our wonderful sponsors, Stuart,
Always.
for allowing us to be here? So
Yes.
I'd like to say a special thanks to Highway Barriers Solutions, Nigel and his team for allowing us to continue doing the podcast, to reinvest into these things. It's been great.
Yeah, and I'm going to say a big thanks to Andy Carruthers and his team at Eastford Excavations, not just for their ongoing support and sponsorship, because they're sponsoring us for another year, as is HBS, as you mentioned, but also a big thanks to Andy for the branded clothing that he so kindly provided us with.
You've
for our
outfitted us
year.
appropriately, yep. Andy. I love the fleece.
So we will have fleeces, so when you see us at Bridgeton or in any other places, we'll be instantly identifiable for our nice fleeces with our Scottish Roads Archive logos.
Absolutely. And for anyone that's been to Bridgeton Bus Garage, even on a warm day, it can be quite cold in there. So the fleece is wonderful.
Yeah, and again, just to emphasise that point, that the Scottish Roads Archive is obviously a small volunteer-run organisation that is self-funded. We don't get any formal grants or anything like that from anyone. That you can support us. We do accept donations, both material and financial donations, actually, to help with running costs. But we do have a series of booklets available. Most of you will know that, but we do have 6 booklets available on the website, and the proceeds from those booklets go towards our running costs. Everybody's moaning about this at the moment, but our costs are also increasing. Even the software and things for keeping these podcasts online, that several hundred.
Do you know what the thing is? It's cloud storage as well and all that stuff. Because we've got our digital archive is massive, exponentially. It's increased over the last
5 terabytes or something.
It's huge. But yeah, woe be us, I suppose. But yeah, you're right. It is expensive. But great way to support us. So buy a booklet and then you get something in return, like another keepsake.
Exactly.
So that's fair enough.
And the social media is always there: Facebook, X, Instagram, Blue Sky, Threads. We are on Threads and Blue Sky. We only have a presence. We're not posting daily because we can't schedule posts on there, and we just don't have the time, I'm sorry to say, to go on there and just post every day unless we can schedule.
Facebook's where all the good stuff's at.
It is. Facebook's the main focus. Instagram secondary to that, and then I guess X is still quiet.
X, formerly known as Twitter. Do we still need to say formerly known as Twitter?
I think everybody knows what X is now for all the wrong reasons. But yes.
It's still a tool, isn't it? So that's why. Don't forget to leave us a review, depending on where you're listening to this, on Apple Music or on Spotify. It does help promote the podcast. If you're listening to us on YouTube, I've always wanted to say this, Stuart, smash that like button and subscribe.
Oh, please do, on YouTube especially. Yeah.
I've always wanted to say that. Never got to say it. No. So, no. Anyway,
well, we'll be back again soon, next month, with another new episode. I don't know what the topic is. You and Duncan deal with all these things nowadays. I just turn up.
It's a surprise. It's a surprise. No, it'll be really good. The podcast is still going to, or the Roadscasters is still going to be there. So, right, looking forward to it. And this has been a good episode.
Yep. See you soon.
See you soon. Bye.